Hola, Animigos, and welcome to Keyframers, the animated collaborative coding live stream where we bring imaginative user interfaces to life. I'm your host, Stephen Shaw, but you may know me as @Shashaw.
And I'm your host, David Khorshid.
Together we are coding compadres, animation amigos, Boolean buddies, and keyframe companions.
Yeah, so we are going to be working on sort of a challenge, I guess you could say, more of a dive into some techniques in order to solve a problem. And we're going to be doing that from scratch live here using HTML, CSS, and some JavaScript. So as always, we're happy to answer any questions you may have. So please reach out in the chat or comments with anything that's on your mind.
Yeah, so this is a thread we got tagged in on Twitter last week by Max Bach. And he's essentially wanting a button that's static to become fixed and animating between the two kind of states. And so that's kind of where we were brought in with Can't Flip Animations Help Out Here by Bart Vineman. Thank you for tagging us there. So I kind of posted my initial thoughts on it in reply there, and we're just going to kind of flesh that out a little bit. But this is, a relatively common pattern that you would see where something is, in the flow, and then after a kind of scroll trigger moment, it changes. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely a sort of unique, but it still goes around the general principles of you don't want things to jump from one position to another. You want it to smoothly go there. So, I don't think we've done intersection observer too much.
I feel like we did it once maybe, but I forget what it was for. We've used various scroll libraries before, like scroll out. That's a fun one that we've played with before. I forget the episode, but the whole premise behind this is use intersection observer plus CSS variables to give you very specific control over items, like when they're in the viewport, like triggering these text animations just like that, and controlling position and different things like that. But we're just gonna use some raw intersection observer today. So
sounds like fun.
Yeah, we did just the barest minimum of setup here. We've kind of got an article that is kind of like the tweet mock-up here, where we've got some text, a button, and then a fixed kind of action button. So one of the initial things, like with this, animating from a static position to a fixed position is going to cause a jump in the content. Like, you either need to replace that element with like an equally sized element, or just have two different elements, which is the approach I've decided to take here. I think that's just so much simpler than having to handle like the DOM swap kind of idea.
Yeah.
And so we'll be building basically off of that. So you have one button that's static and one button that's fixed. And so the fixed button just kind of scrolls with the page, and the static button will stay in the flow. But we'll kind of toggle between these two on scroll. As far as CSS goes, it's all just kind of stylistic stuff at this point. Nothing out of the ordinary here. Shouldn't be. I don't have 600 in there. Let's see. There's 400.
You
if that's
do,
more agreeable
though.
For you.
Or maybe the browser's just faking that 600.
Yeah. Okay. Hey, David, do you want to make these buttons pretty while I kind of go over some intersection observer stuff?
I think that they're beautiful as is. All right, fine.
Yeah.
I will think of something.
All right. So intersection observer. It's a newish API for basically tracking position relative to viewport. does a little bit more than that, but it's a lot more performant than the traditional ways of like just running some kind of loop or on scroll, like checking positions and all that. This is like a more baked in browser way to do all of that. So in order to set that up, we need to just actually create a little intersection observer. So let me close this out. So let's get our button. So const action equals document query selector. We'll say that. It's technically action container or whatever, but we're not necessarily the best at naming things. I don't know.
No, historically we have not been, but that's okay.
So let's just go ahead and we'll save kind of a wrapper. Let's just do an intersection observer first. So let's say var observer equals new intersection observer, and then intersection observer takes two props here. What?
Sorry.
What's the params? Yeah, function params, not props. I've been in React way too much. But the first thing is a function that receives entries, and the entries is just an array of all the elements that you're going to track with intersection observer. In this instance, we're only going to track one element, but this allows you to track more than one with one kind of observer that you could turn on and off and all that. So we won't worry about that now. And then there's also some options. So I'm going to pass in the option threshold 1. And this threshold basically, hey, arguments. Thank you, Daniel Cruz in the chat. So threshold 1 basically just means we want the entire element to be visible rather than having this trigger like at partial visibility. Because if you don't set that, you get the intersection observer function firing basically every time like it's up against the edge. We really only want it to fire like once, when it's leaving or when it's entering. So this helps with that. And then let's see. So from there we can do just like console.log entries 0 dot what is it, intersection ratio, and finally we need to say observer dot observe. Is that right? Yeah, observe.
It is an interesting API.
It's very strange, and I think that's why it hasn't like gotten super mainstream. It's just been it's not what people expect from like a scroll tracking kind of library, and so yeah, it's just kind of led to a lot of confusion, I think. Okay, so we've already got some stuff showing up in the console. Let's clear it out so we can see how everything is at first. Okay, so we've got the intersection ratio as 0 right now because the element is technically hidden. The action button element is hidden. It's not in the viewport, but whenever we scroll it into the viewport, we get 1. As it's going on its way out, we get kind of a percentage deal, but we're not going to mess with that too much. I'm going to show another way to kind of track that, it like going in or coming out. So entries is an array. We're only tracking one element, so we're only really concerned about the first element of that array. And each of these entries kind of gets several different things, including a bounding client rectangle. Intersection ratio is basically how much of the element is visible. Like if it's 1, the whole element is visible. If it's less than 1, part of the element is visible. If we, let's see, So yeah, if we look at intersection observer entry, we can see all the things available here. There's bounding client rect, intersection ratio, intersection rectangle, like how much of the element is intersecting, and just a simple Boolean of is intersecting, and the target, the element itself. So for this, we basically only want to track is this element visible, or is it off the top of the screen? That's basically all we need to know, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Sounds
So
about right.
so we can tweak that this a little bit. Let's say, so we want to track the scroll position. So let's say let scroll position equal 1, and so 1 is going to be off the screen at the bottom. 0 is going to be visible just in the viewport, and -1 will be off the top of the screen. So basically just where it is in conjunction to the current viewport. So let's say if entries intersection ratio equals 1, then we'll say scroll position equals 0. And then that should right away just show us a nice little so 1 or 0.
Oh, cool.
0.
That is quite handy.
Yeah.
I don't think it goes to -1 in my screen though.
No, it's not there yet. So this is just tracking if it's in the viewport at all.
Right.
So if it's in the viewport, that's. But I mentioned that bounding client rectangle that entries give, so we can use that to actually detect if it's kind of above the viewport. So else if entries 0 bounding client rect dot y is less than 0, and we'll say scroll position equals -1.
I'm surprised they used bounding client rect. I knew there was get bounding client rect, and I thought that was overly verbose. So this is at least a slight improvement.
Yeah. So, but now you can see, when it's on its way out, it gets -1. When it's in the viewport, it's 0. When it's out the bottom, it's 1. So this just gives us some values we can play with. But why don't we kind of wrap this in a little function to just make it a little nicer,
reusable.
Nicer to work with. So let's say track scroll position. We'll take in an element and an onChange function, and then we'll that all in there, and then turn observer so that it can be controlled later if needed. Okay. And let's return. Okay, let's call onChange scroll position, and let's just give it the entry 0 as well. And we can hit that now. We'll say track scroll position, L action, and then our onChange function, scroll position, do action.dataset, scroll position, and console.log scroll position for fun. So we should still be getting the same kind of values here. Yep, it's 0, -1, 0, 1. Okay, great. Right, so that's a nice little clean wrapper function that you can use, and that could easily be fleshed out to give you like the where it is in the viewport and all that kind of stuff. But for now, this is all we really want to track.
Cool.
So Cool.
So we could definitely use that to have some stateful animations here.
Right. So I've already set it as a data attribute. So let's just go in here. So we've got action button, button static, button fixed. Let's say and data position equals data scroll position equals -1. Focus on that. So this is the case where
it's going away.
Right, it's going away. So we'll say static will be opacity 0 and fixed will be opacity 1. And let's say the fixed button is just opacity 0 by default.
Then we could just do a little reversey. 0, right? 0.
Wait, what did you do?
I just copy pasted your thing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so we have -1, we have 0, and that is cool.
Yeah. And that, yeah, I mean, we don't even technically need this. We can just have the default state, you know, kind of as that if we want to, so that the fixed button is just hidden by default unless the JavaScript is activated and the scroll position triggers and all that.
No, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. All right, so cool. So this is like the MVP, minimum viable product. It like works, but of course the challenge involves some more stuff. We want to actually move it.
We can obviously make this better just by, you know, transform scale 0 and transform scale 0. Let's say and then transform none. You know, give some animation that way, and you know that is perfectly fine. But yeah, we do kind of want to animate, you know, hi there into the fixed position. Let's go ahead and say plus sign there, sign there. Get fun. That looks great. Okay, font size.
Ooh,
that a little bit smaller. Yeah, don't worry about it. There we go. Wait. Oh yeah, you've already padding 0 on there, so that's awesome. Get that sent.
You don't think my buttons are pretty enough?
Oh no, they certainly are. They certainly are. All right. Okay. So, yeah, how would you want to approach
the flipping?
Yeah.
Well, all right. Let's see. We already have our data scroll position. We could use that. We could consider that different states. I would personally not name my finite states -1 and 0, but that's okay. We're gonna do this here. So I'm just copying and pasting some stuff over from Flip. I got this from the Flip Between States Keyframers episode 3.13. We're pretty much using this code wherever we do Flip. It's a nice copy paste, all of 20 lines or something of code, in order to flip from one view to another, which is exactly what we want to do here. And now that Shaw has provided us those values of scroll positions, we know exactly when we want that flip animation to occur. So I guess for now, what we could do is let's comment out this static and fixed stuff. So now you're just going to see it immediately. Well, oops, I guess, all right. So the opacity is what we want. We don't want the transform. So I'm just going to put an X there. All right. Did that work? There's something broken in the JavaScript.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, no worries.
There we go.
So
should be working now.
Is it though? Yes, it is. All right, cool. So we still have the fading in, fading out. And now we have this handy flip function, which We'll explain briefly at the end, but it's basically, it allows you to do something, given the first element and the last element. uh, it basically lets you do that thing that changes where those elements appear, so that you could animate from the first element to the last element. So let's apply that, because over here, I guess you have flip already right there, which is awesome. So that's going to be our function. Our first L, we do need a reference to both of the buttons, and you have
so
that
I've
up
added
here.
that at the top, L action static and L action fixed.
Yeah, let's just.
But that'll need to vary depending on which direction.
Yeah, I'm feeling lazy though, so let's do it in one direction for now, just to see that works. L action fixed. Okay, so that's our first element and our last element, or rather the function that gives us the last elements. Now, this alone isn't going to do anything. What this is going to do is it's going to attach a bunch of data attributes. I almost said attributes. Data attributes and CSS variables to the buttons. So we can play around with those.
Yeah. All right. So yeah, let's just get some visualization of them. Let's see. So one thing we do is use like a before element, position, absolute, percent, so we can see them a little bit. Do fixed, top 0, 0. Right, and content, we'll do data. Was it data attribute style? Yeah, because we'll want the. It's there. Does that give us anything?
And by the way, for now, I think we're just going to animate the position. I guess we could do the scale too, but that's a little bit more involved. I don't know.
Yeah, we'll
play it by ear.
Okay, yeah, so we've got our variables there. Let's say color.
Oh gosh.
Yeah.
It's already working in the craziest way. You see it just flying.
Yeah. So yeah, let's cover those variables a little bit real quick. So we've got dx, dy, dw, and dh. Dx is the difference in the x position between this fixed button and the static button. Dy is the difference in the y position. Dw is the difference in width. So this is roughly half the width of the static button, and dh is difference in height. So it's a little bit taller than the other. Right. So we can use those CSS variables just like David has done here. He's got this data flipping attribute where we apply no transition because we want it to instantly move to this position, and he's using the dx and the dy to make it kind of start from that place. Let's see. Yeah, that's already working nicely.
All right. Oops, that went the wrong way. Equals. So it could either be -1 or 0, right?
It can be 1, -1, or 0.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, so we would only want to trigger this if it's not 1.
Okay, so scroll position. Oh, well, I guess, yeah, you read my mind. So if it's 1, we do nothing.
Right.
Okay, otherwise we do a little reversey type thing over here. So if you're unfamiliar with this syntax, this is ES6 syntax. It's objects, or I guess array destructuring. We're saying that I'm declaring these two variables, first L and last L, to be either L action static and L action fixed, or L action fixed and L action static. So, and then I'm just putting them right here. And it works as expected. That's pretty nice. And honestly, it moves fast enough that, we like the whole morphing thing, we don't really have to worry about that.
Yeah, I mean that's pretty great though. Let's see. Yeah, I'm impressed.
Yeah, it works. It just works.
Okay. Pretty cool. Pretty cool.
That's
All right.
fast.
Yeah. So
Although we do have to, that opacity is a bit problematic. So I'm going to do transition transform because that's the only thing that we're going to be animating. And that should solve that problem, which it does.
yeah.
So that's good.
Boom. Yeah, that's pretty great.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's certainly matching the like position aspect of it. We can maybe handle a little bit of scaling.
Yeah, so do we want a background element on the button? I'm not sure if we've ran into problems with that before or not. Um, actually buttons can have a pseudo element, so we don't even have to add a background attribute or anything.
Yeah,
In fact, you're using that here for this fun stuff. So I might get rid of, or actually no, you could keep the before. I'll just do it in after. So let's see, absolute content, because I keep forgetting that. Height 100%, width 100%, and that background, now we're going to be transferring that from the actual button to the pseudo elements, and that's because we want to animate only the pseudo elements and have that be the, oh wow, it's completely in the wrong position, and have the pseudo element be that. So it's adding the top, left 0, background should be none, and that should all be behind, so I have to do z-1, I believe. Yeah, there we go. Cool. So this pseudo element is what we're going to be scaling. Yeah, that's what we're going to be scaling because we're transforming the button. The button doesn't need to scale. Otherwise, if you're scaling the button, then you're going to be dealing with warped text. It's going to look pretty ugly, and it's just a pain to do. Libraries such as Framer Motion handle this for you, which is really great, but we don't have the luxury of using Framer Motion on a vanilla JavaScript project over here. So it looks like it's Oh, right.
Yeah, it's still working, and
it's working. We're just not transforming yet. So I'm just gonna move this. Oh, yeah. No, we'll move it down here. Keep everything nice and organized. So the after, we are going to scale it, and we're going to scale it by DW and DH. I forget if we have to multiply or divide it by something. I guess we'll find out.
I think it's 1 divided by.
Yeah, probably.
And
it's not divided by 1 because that would be
transition inherit.
A little bit silly.
Adding the transition on there. Okay, that seems to be doing something. Let me hide the other pseudo element because it's getting a little distracting.
Yeah. Okay.
That's getting it.
Yeah, that's definitely looking about right. We removed the border radius. We could copy pasta something to add that back in, or we could actually, we don't really have to do any math. We could just animate the border radius as well with the after. So we could say border radius, was it like 50% or something? And then this is border radius 0.
Yeah, we would only do that. We need to apply that in a different area. So it would be because this, you're doing that on both buttons, but it needs to just be one way. So for fixed, we would say do like a radius 50% variable, and for static we do radius 0.
Gotcha.
something
Forgot
like that.
about that. Yep. You're right. So, um,
Let's see.
I got an idea. Hold on. Like we could do a border radius, fair radius, and then we could. Oh wait, you already
We
have
need
that.
that. Yeah, we need that up here,
Uh-huh.
and then we need like the opposite radius, I guess. Real quick in the chat, Max, who kind of did this challenge, was saying, would it still work if you overscroll a bit on the way back up? So yeah, it does. You know, if you're scrolling fast, it it gets a little floaty sometimes, but it's moving visually from where that was, so it's not a distraction to me. But yeah, it tracks pretty well there, even if you're going fast.
Let's make this 2 seconds. Let's just see what that feels like. I know it's going to feel really slow, but the border radius like
it's not
goes really fast. Like it just so
well, we're not oh, you added it there. Okay. That should be working, but we're not actually like transitioning it. That's
Are you sure?
Oh yeah.
We should be, or at least it should be inherited. Oh wait, no, it's not. You're right. We are very forgetful. So
right,
in
so
this
we need
after
like old radius. I don't know. It's like we need to apply
transition duration inherit. Is that going to work?
Let's see.
It does. Okay.
Is that
totally works?
Yeah, the border radius itself, though, we're not actually transitioning it. Yes, it's in the transition, but we're not changing the value.
Why
because,
not?
Well, because the radius variable is just being set. So we need to like override it in the after with like the other value.
Okay.
So let's see. Let's do fixed radius, or let's say radius fixed 50%, radius static 0, and then we'll do radius or radius static prev radius bar radius fixed, and then copy that here, this, but reverse it.
We're basically doing flipping right in the CSS.
Radius bar prev radius.
So it's a bit complicated, but it works.
All right, well, it should. Yep, there we go.
Cool. Beautiful.
That's quite nice.
Yeah. So obviously with a 2-second duration, you're going to be seeing problems if you try to scroll too fast with interruptibility, which we're probably not going to talk about here just because it's more of an advanced topic. But for most intents and purposes, we could just cut the duration and hope that, Sonic or the Flash isn't using our website. Just scrolling super fast. So
something. Hold on.
Let's see, transition duration. Gonna change that to like 0.6 seconds.
That's fast.
Yeah, we could do like 1 second.
No, I think it needs. Ideally, it's fast, like you would want it to be.
Yeah, like 0.6.
Yeah,
or even 0.5.
Yeah, it feels good. Yeah, the text changing is always a bit odd.
Problematic. Yeah.
And that's where wrappers and stuff can be helpful. That's it's almost like the one that's disappearing. If we just hid the background and faded out the text, that'd almost be the right way
Maybe,
to go.
but yeah.
I mean, interruptibility wise, it's actually working pretty well.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Surprisingly well. Yeah.
We'll just chalk that up to a happy accident.
Yes. Okay. Right. Well, let's see. Okay, we don't want it to trigger right at first. Let's see.
Yeah, you're right. We don't. So
first check equals false equals true.
and of course that first check could probably be derived from just comparing.
Yeah, I didn't want to get into like tracking the previous state and all that kind of stuff.
Right, or we could just check that the dataset.scroll position is not set. But yeah, that works too. That would be like a probably more robust way. Either way, it works. So
yeah. Okay. Yeah. What do you want to do about the inner text? Just say color transparent.
So yeah, it only becomes problematic when we're going back up. So we could just honestly like do a transition just on the text, like shove it in a span and have it be opacity 0 to opacity 1 with a delay.
Let me try something quick.
All right. So you're
yes. Aha.
Oh boy, what'd you do?
Check that out.
That works. Okay. So
aha.
Just
so up here in the button transition, so we've got the transform, and I added color with a shorter duration and a delay in it, so that it's kind of fading out and.
Okay.
Yeah.
That makes it a bit easier to read. So we have two different transitions over here. Cool. So yeah, we just straight up fade it out, and it's like, hey, you should not be trying to read text while it's moving anyway. So this makes sense from a usability perspective.
Yeah. I am a fan.
Yeah, and Max Bach, or Book, however you pronounce the last name, said that I was way lazier with the text, just hit it on transition. We're basically doing the same thing, except, with a nice little fade. But yeah. And I'm sure that there are some fancier things you could do there. Like if we split the plus and the high there in different elements, then we could orchestrate those. And that's probably a separate episode. But what we could do is like animate the plus to the middle and animate the high there. So it's like just out of the way. And but there's a lot of cool things you could do there. All of that builds on the flip technique. So it's not that it's harder. It's just that it's more work. But it's still pretty straightforward, but we're not going to do that here. It's outside the scope of the challenge.
Yeah. That's very surprising, how well that all came together here.
Yeah, and that looks great.
Mm-hmm. All right. So yeah, I mean that's the basic solution. So if you're just watching this full thing, watching live, stay with us. We're gonna kind of break down a few of the techniques we've used
Mm-hmm.
here to just make some little bite-sized tutorials
Yep.
that you can check out later. What do you think we should cover here, David?
Definitely observer,
Yeah.
the intersection observer, and then just briefly cover flipping again, unless we don't need to do that.
Yeah, we don't need another flipping. So if you're interested in flipping, like
Yeah,
check out
then
our other stuff. We can talk a little bit about just how we handled the transition. With
yeah. So honestly, I think intersection observer is the only thing we really need to talk about here, because everything else builds on that.
yeah, transitioning. Yeah. I might be able to sum it all up in that.
Yeah.
We'll try and break it up into two here.
Okay, sounds good.
Let me see about a little bit of setup here. Comment that out.
I have a straight console log somewhere. Let's get rid of that.
If we disable the flipping, just those few lines of CSS, we get a pretty straightforward little toggle there. So that's great.
Cool. Yeah.
All right. Okay. Let me get my script ready here, and I'll do a little note for myself here. Hola, Animigos, and welcome to Keyframers. I'm Stephen Shaw.
And I am David Khorshid.
Let's take a quick look at a technique from this scroll-triggered flip animation that we built. Let's talk a little bit about Internet Explorer.
Yes, the internet.
Let's talk about Intersection Observer. This is kind of a built-in browser API for tracking kind of scroll changes. Basically, all of the scroll tracking libraries out there, this is kind of meant to do some of that, but it's kind of a weird API. So a lot of people haven't really jumped into using it, but it's really great for doing kind of scroll triggered animations like this. So what we've done is we've built this kind of wrapper function to just help us out, this track scroll position. And what this is doing, it's setting up a new intersection observer. This is the browser API. And that takes two arguments here. The first one is a function that whenever the scroll change kind of trigger happens, it runs this function. And then the second one is just kind of a options object. The great thing about intersection observer over like doing an on scroll kind of trigger is that you can, it's a lot more performant. It's not triggering every time you scroll. It's only triggering when something intersects. So for instance, when this is intersecting with the edge of the viewport. So what we've set up here is we're actually just tracking the scroll position. So 1 equals, it's off the bottom of the viewport, 0 is in the viewport, and -1 is off the top of the viewport. And this allows us to know, is the element off screen on the bottom? Is it visible, or is it off the top? We're really only interested in these two, 0 and -1, and we can use that. Let me take off all the fancy flipping stuff that we're doing that you can go back and see the other videos about. But at its most basic, we've just got data scroll position equals -1 on our action button container here that we're running the track scroll position on, and we're setting that data attribute here. So whenever we actually trigger that change, we're kind of just toggling between these two two elements. So we have a fixed element and a static element. The fixed one is this floating kind of plus button, and then the static one stays in the flow. That this way we're not like moving an element from the static layout into a fixed position, because then you have to do all sorts of calculations to prevent like content jumping and like the scroll position changing and like all this kind of wild stuff. So by doing two separate elements and just animating between them, or in this case kind of toggling between them, you get that same kind of effect, and it's much easier to actually control and work with. Have you done much with Intersection Observer, David?
I have not. I played around with it a few months ago, but very briefly.
It is such a weird little API that not a lot of people have really gotten familiar with, because it's so different than like true scroll tracking libraries and all of that. But it can do a lot of that same stuff. You just have to kind of get familiar with the API. But it gives you the bounding client rectangle, the ratio of intersection, like all this really great information that you can use to kind of do these fun scroll triggers.
Yeah.
All right. Let's go into transitioning with Flip. We won't dive in to like the flip stuff too deeply. But let's just go over like how we're using it here in like the track scroll position bit, and then how we're kind of handling the border radius and the color transition. All right. If you'll start us off on that.
All right, let's talk about Flip and states and transitioning between those states with Flip. One of our basic mantras here on the keyframers is that as long as you have the data available, like to do whatever you want to do, then you could use that for animation. And the way we get that data is by doing things such as tracking scroll position, measuring clients' recs of any elements that we're tracking. And so we're going to be using that information to actually make this button smoothly transition from the center to a fixed position, or vice versa. We do have some videos on the flip technique, and so you could go back and watch those if you want to dive deeper into the flip technique. But just going over it briefly here, flip stands for first, last, invert, play, which means we get the first position, do something, get the last position, invert it so that the last position looks like it's in the first position, and then play it so that that animates to 0 and we go to its resting position. And so in the track scroll position, we are taking that scroll position, and if it changed, or I guess we have a special check over here to see if it's the first one or not.
Basically just ignoring the very first instance of it firing. And then going from there. And then the scroll position equals 1 means it's off screen on the bottom. We don't want to do anything in that case. We're only interested in, is it visible or is it off the top of the viewport there.
Right. So we're grabbing the first and last element and sort of determining that based on the scroll position. -1 means what again? I got those reversed.
-1 means it's off the top.
Yes. All right. And then 0 means it is, I guess, from the bottom. So using that, we could determine which button should be the first one and which button should be the last one. And so that's what we're passing into Flip. This is the thing that that causes something to change. In this case, nothing is really changing. We're just setting that data set scroll position property to that scroll position. And then we give it both of those elements so that we could do the delta calculations and animate between those. Now, in that function, we're getting a bunch of CSS variables and also having data attributes set, which we could use in animation. And so that's exactly what we're doing in the CSS over here. So if you look at data flipping, we see that we are transforming based on the delta X and the delta Y.
And this is applied on the buttons.
Yeah. So
to the actual button that's going to be transitioning. So in this case, where we've got the static button visible, and then we're transitioning to the fixed position, when this first triggers, we're applying this data flipping attribute onto the fixed button, and it's getting all of these CSS variables that we talked about in the flipping function, and then it goes, it animates from there.
Right. And to smoothly animate the scaling of it, we're using a technique we've used in the past called background element. And in this case, buttons have pseudo elements, so they have a before and an after elements. We're just grabbing the after elements and we are scaling it by the inverse of the change in width and the inverse of the change in height. And we're also transitioning the border radius too from the previous radius, which could be either 0 or 50%, to the current radius. And so that gives us our nice scaling effect.
Yeah. And it works surprisingly well. Like the interruption of it and everything is actually working very smoothly. We haven't had that fortune in the past.
Don't scroll too fast.
But it still works pretty well. There. So flip is a great technique, and the really straight, not necessarily straightforward and simple, but the minimal function that we do in a lot of our episodes, in the CSS variables that we use, can let you do a lot of really cool things with kind of a minimum of JavaScript. So yeah, that's overall how we built this animation, some of the core techniques from it. Yeah. You want to close this
Outro
out,
time,
David?
Yeah, sure. So you can watch the full process of creating this animation for a deeper dive into each one of the techniques that we talked about on the full live stream links below. You could also leave us a comment if you have any questions, and we'll be sure to answer them.
Yeah, and thanks to Max Bach for this kind of challenge. This was a fun little setup, and thanks for Bart for tagging us in there. This was definitely a fun build. I enjoyed it. Our show is supported by our sponsors, CodePen at codepin.io, CSS Tricks at css-tricks.com, and viewers like you can pledge at patreon.com/keyframers and subscribe to our channel for more great content. We've got plenty of links available below. That's all we have for you now. Until next time, adios, amigos.
Adios.